Disclaimer, spoilers for the JJK manga, but specifically only for Yuji, Itadori, and Sukuna. Gege absolutely cooked with chapter 265 and somehow managed to glaze Yuji and Sukuna in the same chapter. And I typically don't like to do chapter review videos because that schedule would be crazy, but this chapter reveals something so insane I couldn't help but yap about it. But before we dive in, make sure and like the video, okay guys? Thank you. A curse technique applied to a domain is guaranteed to hit. This is the reasoning that the narrator implies that Yuji deployed his domain. But we don't get a name for his domain. No benevolent shrine, no left right goodnight, simply the words domain expansion, and then a train station or airport of some kind. We know that Yuji was able to learn the basics of barrier techniques from his swap training with Kusakabe, and from the structures we see around them we can assume that Yuji constructed a barrier for his domain. Also, a barrierless domain is a divine feat and Yuji is a novice. But I'm gonna give my headcanon and say that the barrier is massive, much like the insane effective range that Sukuna's domain possesses. I also want to focus on the reason Yuji opened his domain and point out that we actually don't know what technique is imbued into Yuji's domain at this point. Yuji is in possession of two curse techniques, blood manipulation and shrine, and unlike most sorcerers who have their curse techniques and domain etched into their souls from the time of their birth, Yuji didn't have that. He's crafting a domain from scratch. How would someone do this? Simple. Actually not that simple, but you imbue a curse technique into a barrier, and inside of the domain the structures and functions come from two places: your innate domain for the structure and the technique imbued for the sure hit effect. And this is where I want to focus on the innate domain part, because this is where I believe the key to understanding Yuji's domain expansion lies. The structure of the inside of his domain seems to be some type of train station or airport. If it's a train station, that's some insane foreshadowing on Gege's part, like since season 1 he knew it was what it was gonna be. But if it's an airport, it really doesn't change the functionality because both of them represent the same thing: crossroads. Yuji's domain seems to be situated in a place where people or souls depart or enter another place. This could be what Sukuna was speaking about when he said that the technique adjusted for the era and the sorcerer. Sukuna's shrine manifests with the structure because it's an Heian era representation of an altar, a place where Sukuna is worshipped and given offerings because he's the strongest among all. And remember, the way his domain functions was due to the binding vows he placed on it during the Heian era. And the mouths again is another representation of him literally eating the offerings brought to him because his technique is centered around cooking, which I believe the focus around cooking is a manifestation of his soul's desires that, you know, he's the strongest and he'll devour all his enemies, blah blah blah. Just like the appearance in a train station is a representation of Yuji's desire to guide people to a good death, but more on that later. Sukuna's domain possesses the shrine in the center with the bones because of his innate domain, because it's a fusion of the curse technique which consists of 2 slashing attacks and the flames, along with Sukuna's innate domain, which we saw. We can see that the literal theme of Sukuna's domain, malevolent shrine, is the same as his innate domain. The tons of bones and abysmal and empty background all come from there, which is why I believe the train station airport is the structure that manifests from Yuji's innate domain. A large clue towards this was when Sukuna recovered his domain, the look changed because he needed to construct a new one based on the state and the body that he was in. The biggest clue that we get towards knowing how Yuji's domain functions comes from the fact that Sukuna is in his Yuji-kuna form inside of Yuji's domain. Sukuna being in this form, even though he already revived his Heian era form, before the shrine, before the blood manipulation, Yuji had an innate jujutsu ability, which was being a vessel. The very first thing we find out about Yuji is he's the perfect vessel for housing Sukuna, and someone like that only appears every 1,000 years. And as a vessel, Yuji became aware of his soul and therefore was able to attack other souls. That's why Sukuna is in this form, because Yuji's domain directly interacts with the soul, and since Sukuna used to be Yuji, when he's pulled into the domain, the sure hit effect immediately ripped out Sukuna's soul. And this makes sense because Sukuna thought that Yuji took a binding vow to fire the soul splitting dismantle, but he also thought that Gojo made a binding vow to fire the 200% purple, when Gojo just relied on his friends. In this same way, while he's aware of the fact that Yuji can attack directly at the soul, he might also be mistaken about Yuji using a binding vow, and this could just be another demonstration of Yuji's proficiency with Jujutsu sorcery. But if Sukuna isn't wrong, then it still buffs Yuji because it shows he was able to take inspiration from other domains when crafting his. How I think Yuji's domain is gonna work is sort of the way Higuruma's did, where a condition will be applied to the domain. If that condition is met, the sure hit effect of the domain will be sustained, i.e. Yuji now has to beat Sukuna inside the domain to finish ripping his soul away and defeat him. And if you all want to see me cover that when it happens, you should definitely like this video and subscribe to the channel. Anyway, Just like the person had to be found guilty in Higuruma's domain for judgment to decide on punishment based on their guilt, this is why Yuji's domain would interact directly with the soul, because the majority of Yuji's attacks already interact directly with the soul. The functionality of the domain and the technique, I believe, however, is a modern version of Sukuna's shrine adjusted for Yuji. See, that's why I said earlier that I think the barrier of the domain is massive, because this is only one part of his shrine. The other parts are going to involve going through memories, and we have seen in the past that Yuji has that effect on people. First with Todo creating an entire dream sequence in his mind, and then with Choso multiple times at the picnic table. These memories always had the effect of making people see Yuji as someone to care about or someone close to them. I believe the same effect is going to be present in Yuji's domain. Yuji and Sukuna might literally have to travel down memory lane for both of them, with Yuji having to beat Sukuna at every major memory, which could also mean we're gonna finally get a Heian era flashback, hopefully, please Gege. But like I said earlier, Yuji's goal is to guide people's souls to a good death. Just like Gojo was in the airport at the crossroads of life and death, the train station, just like Sukuna's shrine, is an era-accurate representation of the concept that the domain represents. When Gojo told Jogo that he was seeing the inner world of Limitless, Gojo used that as the basis for his domain, most likely because the short-head effect of his domain is overstimulating the mind. Another large hint we get to this was the hand sign Yuji used to open his domain. It's inspired by Kasichi Gaba, excuse me if I butchered that again, who is a famous bodhisattva in Buddhism, and excuse me if I butchered the word bodhisattva. But a bodhisattva in Buddhism is essentially a monk who is one step below achieving enlightenment and becoming a full Buddha. So during this time, they go about spreading the word of the Buddha to mankind. And this specific Buddha, who is the inspiration for Yuji's domain hand sign, is known for wanting to guide souls who had no chance of redemption in life, putting off his enlightenment until all these damn souls are saved from hell, which further reflects the point of this being a manifestation of Yuji's innate domain, because his ultimate goal is to guide souls to a good death. And who is more damned than Sukuna, the literal king of all curses? So to go over everything I just said, basically, Yuji's domain is going to be a walk down memory lane because his goal is to guide souls to a good death. The train is the opening point because it's a representation of leaving this life with a modern structure, and this is consistent with the rules that we've seen for domains, an innate domain combined with a curse technique. Because remember, the short hit effect doesn't have to be an insta-kill, and the domain Yuji has arguably had the most experience with was a domain that did not have a short kill effect. The short hit subjects you to the rules of the domain, which then applied certain conditions to give the caster an advantage, like confiscating cursed energy, a technique or a tool, and then giving the caster an advantage such as a weapon. Yuji's domain could have isolated Sukuna's soul, and depending on the rules of the domain, it will give Yuji some sort of advantage in the fight against Sukuna, aiding him from tearing Sukuna's soul away. But like I said, guys, I don't know if this is just a theory based on what I've seen so far. I could be completely wrong, but I back myself 100 and I think I'm right. So let me know what you all think in the comments. If you like this video, make sure and like the video. And if you really believe in this theory, you know, maybe you should subscribe to the channel. It helps me continue making more videos like this for you guys. So until next time, see you.